You come to me on this, the day of my season's launch, and you ask me to have takes? Let's talk about the hottest takes in Marvel Snap. The metagame, while real, is greatly exaggerated and sometimes created by popular creators and hype for a new card. There are cards slash decks that are strictly better than others, but oftentimes the meta changes without any major balances or releases. Many low tier decks can win ladder. So, this is a comment that I actually kind of love because it's actually three different comments, but it is acting like all of them are the same or advancing the same argument. So I'm gonna talk about them in backwards order. The first one that I want to talk about is many like lower tier decks can win ladder. Absolutely. Never been at issue. When we talk about meta games, it's usually at a like very high level of competition this stuff starts actually mattering. And I have said before that I think people overestimate where they are at in terms of when this stuff starts really, really mattering. Like when you have to really, really care about it. A lot of when I do my meta reports, a lot of what I do is try to make them sort of scouting reports so that if you are someone who doesn't have these cards or whatever, what you can do, what you can still get out of value from those videos is you can then understand what your opponents are playing when you see two cards. Because that's actually like a pretty important thing to do, is knowing what your opponents are doing. And so when we talk about metagames, the metagame writ large is just what are my opponents doing and what is good into what my opponents are doing. A great example of that is how, after the Atuma change happened, we got a buff to the Scar deck effectively, but really what's happening there is a lot of people are playing like Alioth Wiccan decks, a lot of people are playing Alioth Arishem decks, ramp into Alioth as a dominant strategy, and a deck that is really good against that, like one that is cheating out energy with Mockingbird and Scar and things like that, and that's a really good meta game for that. That can be shown by, Alioth having a higher play rate than Shang-Chi. And like this is a real concept. It is a real thing. I think people think of metagame as the lists on my tier list. That's not what it is. It's the sort of changes that players are making to adapt to what other players are making. The next part of this was the oftentimes the meta changes without any new card or release. That's good. That's normal. In other card games, that's the only thing that happens, right? Like the metagame develops as players recognize what other players are playing and how to beat it. Of course, it changes when there are no new card releases. Nobody ever said it shouldn't. In fact, the fact that people think that Marvel Snap's metagame is wholly defined by new card releases and changes like that is a testament to how good they are at balancing, because people don't even realize that normally metagames can be self-correcting. In every other card game, like Hearthstone or Magic or whatever, these are things that last 3 months and they are constantly changing and shifting. There's never just one deck that is the best. Rarely. When there is one deck that is the best the entire time, people hate it. And a lot of the time there are like a deck that is the best and then another deck is able to counter that meaningfully, because once that deck becomes the expected thing that you build your deck to beat, you are able to do that. And thus metagames constantly shift in other games without the influence of balance in any way. And I think that that being a surprise to people is actually crazy to me. And finally, the last one, which is the metagame is greatly exaggerated and created by popular content creators. I'm not going to sit here and say content creators don't have an influence on the metagame, but the idea that it's not real is just sort of fallacious because of that. Like, yeah, when Cozy or Regis makes a deck, a lot of people play it, but they don't just keep playing it if it's losing, right? And that's why I think when people talk about like bubbles, right? People talk about like, oh, Top Infinite, it's a bubble. The bubble there is that people stop playing stuff when it's bad. And at other ranks, that's genuinely not necessarily true. And so when you have a situation like this, I do think it's worthwhile to listen to people at the top end of Infinite. Like, there are people that I listen to, and I'm at the top end of Infinite. Like, at the time of recording this video, I'm somewhere between like 10 and 15. I haven't logged on. I don't plan on logging on before the season rolls over, so I won't know where I finish until we're able to check the leaderboards, which are broken. But like, this is not something that sprouts up out of thin air. There are like influencers on it, but generally speaking, what happens is, the influencers get people to pick up a deck, and if that deck is working, then people will continue playing it, and if that deck is not working, then they stop playing it and they go look for something else. It's not like people magically keep playing this crap if it's crap. There should be a predictable schedule for when new cards come back into caches, i.e., each card would be re released every 2 to 3 months, so you know how long you have to wait before the card comes back. There would need to be more series drops so old cards aren't too inaccessible. I think a schedule like this is the kind of thing that would be good for players, but bad for making money. Like, my theory of why they do it like this is basically I think that they think that FOMO makes more money than not FOMO. And I think that they are probably objectively correct about that. There's probably I wouldn't know. I don't know anything about monetization, but I'm guessing that there's a bunch of research that says that FOMO tactics work. And you have the store set up like this, and you have their acquisition set up like this, and everything in this game, like from the variants to the borders to everything, it's all about you're afraid that you won't be able to get this in the near future. It is like it's a very simple sales tactic, right? Like, oh, limited time only sale, right? This is 50% off now, but in the future, you'll have to pay 6,000 tokens for it instead of being able to open it in caches. Get your limited time off sale right now. And that's actually what I would draw the analogy of from like Marvel Snap's acquisition. It's like imagine if a luxury good released with a week-long sale, and then if you didn't get it in the week-long period, it would be more expensive, right? Like that's sort of the concept that I think of with this. It's like imagine it's like some sort of made to order type thing, and then if you don't get it, you have no idea when it'll be back next, and you can get it if they have it in stock, but it'll be more expensive because you didn't do the made to order thing. Or that's sort of what it feels like to me, where it's like that's the monetization strategy that they've gone for, and they've like hidden it behind like a bunch of different like various currencies and loops and obfuscations. They're also monetizing variants, and we'll probably cover that a little bit later. But I do think that it would probably undermine the baseline of the strategy if they told you the next time it was going to be there. And I'm not making a value judgment on that. I think it kind of sucks, but I do think that if you propose this to them, they'd be like, we can't do that. The whole system is predicated on this FOMO stuff. The best card released this season was Wiccan. I mean, I think it's between Wiccan and Kate Bishop, and I realize I'm biased towards Kate Bishop because Kate Bishop is such a like play her in whatever, she's never going to be bad card. But I do think you could make this argument pretty coherently. Like, this is a new card that came out. It was absolutely a metagame force immediately. It was very good, very strong, baseline good cards mid-range deck. Extremely powerful, extremely archetype defining. It redefined what those decks were really trying to do. It made them be more 6-drop centric. It was powerful, strong, metagame relevant. This isn't a bad take. It's just I tend to be biased towards the Jeff type cards like Kate Bishop, as opposed to like Wiccan is more of a Hope Summers, I would say, where it's like it might be the strongest thing to do for a little bit, but if something else comes out that eclipses it, it suddenly becomes a lot less worthwhile. Where I find it hard to believe Kate Bishop is not relevant ever. Now that Loki is not a deck anymore, I think they can mess around with reverting Chavez back to her old text. I am not under the impression that Chavez and Loki changes were related in any way. I think that the reason they nerfed America Chavez, her old text, of course, being a 6/9, that nice, was a card that you always drew on turn 6. The effective effect this had was you were always drawing more of your actual cards on turns 1 through 5, which are the turns that really matter for decks that are doing setup-based things. So she was great for destroy. You draw your Deadpool more, your X-23 more, your Boom Boomers more. You would do the thing the deck is built to do more. And so she was great for discard. Again, you're drawing the things your deck is built to do more. It's much more useful there. She was great for bounce. You really want to be bouncing your stuff early in the game. You want to get your 1-drops. You want to get your bouncers. Excellent for that. Like, this is a card that was totally unrelated, in my view, to Loki. The reason America Chavez got nerfed is because she did two things. The first is she made every deck that wanted to sort of snowball more consistent. The less you cared about, synergy, the worse she was. The more you cared about specific game actions on specific turns, the better she was. And Marvel Snap is already sort of tough to balance because there are 12 cards in your deck. Like, it's already sort of hard to make cards that aren't a little bit ridiculous when you do them so much, because of the way 12 card decks lend consistency to a game like this. In other games, there would be, a lot more, I would guess, Sandman games where you're not actually getting Sandman, right? In a game like Magic, just baseline, let's say you're running 4 copies of Sandman out of your 60 cards. That's still happening less on turn 5, right? And so you end up in a situation where there is some inherent consistency boost here, not just because of the 12 card decks, but also because you get 1 energy every turn. You're never going to like miss a land drop and not be able to play your Sandman or whatever, right? The decks are all like that already. And America Chavez was a card that pushed that even further. You want to see more turn 5 Sandmans? Bring back America Chavez. You want to see more turn 1 Deadpool X23 nut draws? Bring back America Chavez. You want to, like, this is just not a card that I think is fundamentally a safe card to bring back ever. And second reason, and I think this one, again, I don't know anything about monetization, but once this was pointed out to me, it's like, oh, they have to nerf this, right? Because they are in the business of selling cards. There are 12 slots in a deck to sell cards for, right? Well, if America Chavez exists, it's 11 slots. They are effectively taking out like 8% of their ability to sell cards. Cards now have to be stronger. Like, if America Chavez exists, it would push power creep even further, because now, let's say you want to make a card to go in a destroy deck, it has to be stronger than not the 12th card, but the 11th card. Because America Chavez is in that deck. She just is, right? And so you end up in a situation where the smaller the deck is, the more you have to creep power to get something into that deck. And then that's just bad for everybody. But at a baseline, it's bad for them, because if you're in the business of selling cards, you want to sell to people with as large of a deck slot size as you possibly can. We should have a mulligan system for a redraw of your opening hand. I actually think this is really bad, because we have a system in this game that already pushes consistency to a level unseen in any other card game. And what I mean by that is 12 card decks are insanely consistent. They are very, very consistent compared to anything else in a card game. I've played the most Magic of the other card games, probably Magic, then Hearthstone, then Runeterra, in that order. And so I'm going to use Magic as an example here. Magic has a mulligan system because it has a mana system, meaning you can get unplayable hands in Magic the Gathering. You can get hands with no lands and be unable to take any game actions and lose the game immediately because of that. You can't do that in Marvel Snap. It's actually impossible. And so that puts a lot more on you as a deck builder to, figure out how to make your deck actually function, because you only have 12 cards. You're drawing 4 of them by the time you are able to play 1, and you're suddenly unable to play any cards. If they added a mulligan system, I strongly suspect that all it would do would be make decks that are combo decks way more consistent. It would be, there are so many more turn 3 Mr. Negatives in the game right now. There are so many more whatever Living Tribunal combos, exactly whatever it needs. I don't think that those decks need to be more consistent. Mr. Negative is actually a great example of a deck that is the platonic ideal of a combo deck, because, and this is the thing about combo decks that makes them weird in this game specifically, is the snap mechanic. Right now, Mr. Negative has a negative win rate, but a very positive cube rate. That's exactly the profile you want a combo deck to have. Once you start getting into high win rates, which a mulligan would do for a Mr. Negative type deck, you end up with problems. I think an example of this would be old Thanos lists had the snap potential of a combo deck, but the ability to stay in games and a win rate of a normal deck. And that's why they were so powerful. Old Arishem lists, and they would snap you on Lokis and stuff like that. Or they would snap you on like Leeches and Doc Ox. It's the potential of a combo deck, meaning I'm snapping because I'm instantly winning the game here, and then the ability to play normal games, the high win rate of a non-combo mid-range deck. And that is the sort of intersection that I would really want to avoid, and I do think that adding a mulligan would just make those combo decks just a little bit, maybe a lot bit too strong, honestly, with the way the snap mechanic works and the power of their snaps once you are doing the specific thing that they're asking you to do. Fun note, by the way, This was actually something they considered in Marvel Snap's development, and eventually what they did was they just made the card Quicksilver, and then everyone complaining about mulligans could just play Quicksilver, and then they stopped complaining about mulligans, which is crazy to me, because, like, that's, like, I get it, but also it's like, wow, that did it? Crazy. It's actually good that gold bundles have middling value now. You used to always be hoarding gold, waiting for the amazing value 7,000 gold bundle to come. Now that those aren't a thing, you can actually spend your gold on tokens, albums, variants that you like. I think this is actually an extremely hot take. This might be one of the hottest takes. Like, I have come to be aware that sometimes this segment is not, me getting mad at hot takes or me reacting to hot takes, but like me taking pot shots at bad takes. This is just a really hot take. This is like I think this is just the kind of take that you have to be like maybe 5% of the population has this take. And I get where it's coming from because it's saying, okay, look, you have this situation where you were previously incentivized to never spend your gold, no matter how cool the variant was, because it was a bad value prop if they made a better bundle down the line. But I think a lot of people will look at this and say, that's cool, but what I really want is the value prop, right? Like, all that's cool and all, but I care about getting the most out of my money. And I think that this sort of elides that a little bit, where it's like, yes, it is nice that this mental pressure no longer exists, but it's the mental pressure of effectively, like what's alleviating the mental pressure effectively is higher prices, right? And so I think that when you look at this, you can say, I get it. I understand how that makes you feel like it's easier to spend money. But the reason it's easier to spend money is because they have taken away a really good sale. It's sort of like, imagine if there was like a once a year sale on something that was like 60% off, right? And like everything you wanted, you could get for 60% off. Wouldn't you feel bad buying it at any other time? Even if there was something you really liked, you'd be like, I should wait for the 60% off sale, right? I should just do that. I should wait for that. And so you'd feel kind of stupid buying it any other time. And so then they took that away. So now you can feel kind of stupid always or feel not stupid ever. Like this is sort of the weird thing, right? Like it's kind of a human psychology question, but I think that there is, like, I understand how this could alleviate that for you, but I think that people complaining about that, they really just wanted the sale, They wanted to be able to spend their money the most efficiently. They didn't want to be able to spend their money inefficiently on cool stuff. They wanted the best deal. If Marvel Snap can do Activate and not have it be too much, they can do Choose One abilities too. Let me choose whether I want my Heimdall to move everything left or right. I don't know. Like, I think Activate is a little bit more intuitive than this happens. You have to choose this when you play the card. And I say that because it's just like literally a long press. Like, that sort of seems a little bit more intuitive to me than what you're describing. I do think we've moved in that direction, though. And I do wonder how many of, like, the original design principles of Marvel Snap have been sort of thrown out the window. And I think people are going to look at that and be like, oh, that's a bad thing. I kind of don't think it is, because when I look at a lot of the original stuff Marvel Snap did, there's a lot of, like, baseline, not necessarily, I won't say mistakes, because, again, they're taking something out of a brain and forming it into reality. And to do that work is like 95% of it. But there's like these like 5% optimizations that I do think could be corrected, and like these baseline assumptions that I do think could be corrected as the game adapts to what it has become, its actual player base, what people want from it. And like we see this in, like, the game has always sort of been adaptive, right? When Nexus events came out and everyone hated that, they changed it. The economy sucked, they changed it. It still sucks. We'll see what happens. But like, they have been nothing if not responsive to community outcry and generally in tune with what the community is, in ways that might not make all of the community happy, but I do think you are being heard most of the time. And so when we look at a take like this, it's like, I think that we are now closer to this making sense than we were, but I don't think it's a direct one-to-one leap. We could be closer to the world where that makes sense because of Activate. But I don't think Activate exists, therefore this should exist, is what I would do about it. It's more like Activate exists. Do we want to consider this? Are there good reasons for considering it? Heimdall specifically, I think, would actually be kind of busted if it did this. I don't think you could do this to Heimdall. And so when you don't do it to Heimdall, it's like, all right, well, what other choose ones actually make sense? Like, I don't think choose one's a bad mechanic or anything like that. It's just like, it's a smaller design space than I think you'd think, in a bit of a weird way. I do think that Activate is a larger design space, but not as large as something like On Reveal or Ongoing, right? Because that's just like ETB and Perpetual Effect, right? That they just keyworded it. But I do think that it's possible that we are now closer to that. I just don't think we can draw the straight line from Activate's okay, therefore this is okay. Move deserves its time to shine with the upcoming cards and should be allowed to be OP for a bit. Multiple other archetypes get to be strong when they're not at the top. Move itself has been trash for all but maybe 30 seconds of Snap history. Let it establish itself. I really wonder about this, right? Because it's like, people say stuff like this, and then it's like when something is busted, they're like, Second Dinner is stupid, they don't play test, these idiots didn't see it coming. I kind of think this is the attitude they had, right? I think this is the attitude they have been operating under the entire time. Like, look, we'd rather the cards just be exciting and cool and good and people play with them than anything else, right? That's what we want. We want these cards to be busted and sick and awesome. And everyone complains about that because they're like, oh, it's power creep. It's painful for me to, I can't afford that new card. I'm getting owned. I really can't speak to this because it feels like I constantly hear stuff from different people who have different opinions on whether this is good or whether this is bad. And a lot of them will be worded like this, where it's like, I think, don't pre-nerf something, make sure it's going to be balanced when you release it. But it's like, what does that entail? Is it easy? Like, if the best solution is to nerf Taskmaster, is the theory that they should go into it knowing they have a solution to this problem and then be like, actually, we're just going to let you have the broken meta. We're just going to let you have the broken meta, and then you can just enjoy that. Have the broken meta. Go nuts. Enjoy the broken meta. Like, as many people as that might make happy, it'll make a lot more of them upset because it's like, oh, you made a broken meta that I have to pay 6,000 tokens for. Cool. Thanks, guys. And so I don't really know what the solution here is. I think a lot of people will probably say, like, the solution is for them not to release any broken cards and not to really, like, that probably can't happen. Like, when you look at stuff like Madam Web and Aranya, they're actually pretty, like, they're kind of right on the line for me in terms of balance. Where it's like, Madam Web at 2-3, patently ridiculous card, you can't do that. Madam Web at 2-1, it's like, okay, Red Guardian exists, I can deal with that, it's still a move deck at the end of the day, I know what's happening here, it's obviously very strong if it gets rolling, but we've had cards like that before, it makes sense. Aranya at 1-1 is like a very powerful card, but it's no longer a problem solver, it's just, I'm boosting your stuff. When it moved of the card you played last, then suddenly I'd be like really scared of it. But as is, at 1-1, I'm like, yeah, okay, this is fine, whatever. And so you have this situation where, like, there are all of these cards that are exciting and cool things to get in the game. And you can tell because of how excited move players are for them. I just think that, like, you don't want... I'm not saying move won't even be the best deck. I think it has a very real chance of being the best deck right now. You just don't want it to be the best deck to a massive degree. And what I mean, like, I think they would be very happy if they came out of this season and a move deck was the best deck. I think they'd be very unhappy if that move deck was dropping 64 power Human Torch Taskmaster on turn 6. And I think that's actually not that far out of the realm of possibility, right? You play Aranya, you Human Torch it. I mean, like, or like, there's just a bunch of stuff. Like, suddenly you have like an 8 power Human Torch on turn 2. You, like, Ghost Spider it, you beast them back up, you play a Madam Webs. You are actually getting to, like, 64, 32, 64 power Human Torches, seeming, like, fairly reasonably. When you have the card Aranya and you have the card Madam Web, it seems like the kind of thing that will happen a decent amount of the time. You put them back in your hand with a Falcon or a Beast, and then you do the thing that's really stupid and Taskmaster it. And so I think that's the kind of play pattern they actually should deal with proactively, basically. I think move decks being good, that's one thing. 128 power on the final turn of the game, that's another. They need to stop printing random 6 cost on cards. Too many 6 costs are archetype specific payoffs, and there aren't enough of the generically powerful finishers like Dr. Doom to make the randomness worthwhile. I think they need to look at random 6 cost as the kind of thing that, you know what, honestly, I kind of agree with this take. Because when you put these text on a card, because so many of them are weird and finicky and odd, you end up in a situation where the card is only ever going to be good if it is great on rate. Hulkling at 613 is probably busted, or probably at least very strong, competing for the best generic 6-drop. But I think what this commenter hits on that is basically correct is there are no other options for a card like this. You can't run it in the synergy deck. It can only be best in slot or not best in slot. Valentina, is that best in slot? No, it's not. Hulkling, is that best in slot? No, it's not. But it's better that we live in a world where those cards are not best in slot, because if we lived in a world where they were best in slot, suddenly you'd have to play around random 6-drop every freaking game, and they would get incredible upside from it because the card would just be good anyway. Like, if Valentina was a 2/4, yeah, it'd be, like, really good. Like, this is the kind of thing where it's like, okay, so what are we actually asking for here? I think that they should continue to make cards like this. I just don't think they should ever push them to a degree where it's actually like a great card. And that's a weird thing, because I think in order to make those cards playable, they would have to push them. People don't complain about the app performance enough. It is buggy, slow, and unreliable. Even when playing with high-end mobile devices or computer presents problems. People should demand a better experience. SD makes millions. What is the excuse? This is like the coldest take I've ever had on here. Maybe the only colder take is economy bad. But if I'm willing to have economy bad on here, I gotta be willing to have client bad on here too. I don't really think you're gonna get a lot of people that argue with you. I think people are just gonna take issue with the tone at most. I personally don't have a ton of issues with the client, but I mostly play on PC. The only issues I really have are things like sometimes I'll leave the queue, and when I leave the queue, it'll have accidentally put me into a game, and I'll have to double check. Kate Bishop, when she puts like the 7th thing into your hand and there's no room for an 8th, she crashes the game sometimes. I don't know. Is this game more or less buggy than comparable games? I want to say it's less buggy, but I'm not actually positive. Based on my experience playing like Magic and Hearthstone and Runeterra, I think it is less buggy. But I also, and this is not to dunk on Ridiculous Hat, who is one of my favorite people. Shout out to Ridiculous Hat. I also, it feels like every time they release a patch, I see Ridiculous Hat tweeting about, like, the bug that does X will be removed in whatever, right? So it's like, I don't know. I haven't played Hearthstone in a while. They have a lot more modes to update. Maybe more things get bugged now. I don't really know. I'd be really interested to know what the actual, like, is there a qualitative difference here? Is Marvel Snap, like, qualitatively worse in terms of client experience than these other games? Because it's been a few years since I've played these other games. I genuinely don't know what they look like in 2024. Like, I knew what they looked like 3-4 years ago. I don't know what they look like now. And so maybe there's a world where I am just using outdated expectations to judge here. I kind of want the community to step in on this one. What do you think? The Atuma OTA is literally a free Series 5 card for everyone who is Series 3 complete. That's, I mean, it's not literally, but it is kind of true, right? And it's why I'm such a big proponent of when you can find the ability to do it and find something exciting to do with these cards, of buffing these older cards. I did a video on it a while ago. 3 of the cards in my video that I proposed should be buffed have been buffed. Claw, Ultron, and Miles Morales were the 3 that I brought up, or 3 of the 5 that I brought up. I actually forget what the other 2 were, but I know I didn't have Atuma on the list. I think Atuma's like a card where it's like Atuma, Typhoid Mary. Cards like this are interesting. I would have done something much stupider with Atuma and Typhoid Mary. I would have just made them 4/12s, right? And what they did with Atuma was actually much cooler, much more interesting, and it makes me realize just how bad it is to sit on the outside and be like a design critique, because there's this thing that happens in Marvel Snap, or in every card game really, where people are able to identify what sucks. The people who play the game are really good at identifying what sucks and really bad at proposing solutions. And I think Atuma is one of those situations in which I was that person, where I was like, Atuma sucks. What's a good solution to that? Let's increase the upside instead of reducing the downside. And what they did internally was like, what if we just made this card cooler, more interesting, and a more dynamic play experience? Way better than what I came up with, which is just make him a 4/12. Then you can zero a 4/12. Like, it's one of those situations where you realize, like, as much as I like to opine on balance and design, as much as I have an ambition to improve and get better at that, as much as all of that is happening, fundamentally, I am still on the outside looking in. I am still subject to gamer brain. It happens. Marvel Snap not remembering your card filters in the collection view is the most tilting part of the game. I cannot believe I forgot this when talking about the client. Oh my god, yes. The amount of times I see every variant, despite never having turned off show favorites, is crazy to me. Please fix this. I'm fine with how they buff or nerf cards, but I can't agree with nerfing cards just because they're worried about future ones. That crosses a line. They shouldn't try to play God and predict the future. Let players get creative and only step in if things really get out of hand. This is the opposite of that take earlier that we were talking about, where it's like, people are going to tell you two different things on this, and they eventually just have to make a call, right? Like, people are going to tell you, don't pre-nerf stuff, but then if you don't pre-nerf it, people are going to be like, you assholes release this broken crap. And if it turns out that the most effective way to deal with it is to deal with Taskmaster, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I don't really have an opinion on this. I personally, like, when I look at it, I think that the problem should be localized to, like, the cards. But if, like, there's a specific play pattern that is not what they intended, and it revolves around this one card, I don't really hate them nerfing it preemptively to not put us in that situation. I think this will be a good test, honestly, because I don't think they've ever done a preemptive nerf like this before. They did Kitty Pride for Elsa, which obviously didn't work. So I guess they've maybe done it one more time. But I want to know if this is actually helpful or harmful, because I guess there's no way to know the counterfactual, but it's kind of interesting to me, at least, that we end up in a situation where so many people are like, oh man, this sucks. And I wonder how many of those people would, if it released in a way that was broken, let's just assume it is broken, right? Would then be angry that they didn't do playtesting, right? Oh, you guys didn't playtest. Oh my god, you idiots. Like, I feel like there'd be a lot of that if they release a broken thing. And the source for that is people say that about stuff that isn't broken all the time. Like, people say that about stuff that is totally fine constantly. And so you end up in a weird spot where it's like, maybe we are supposed to do this. I don't know. Not directly about Snap, but many creators in their communities wish the comic artist would be paid for the art that is used in Snap, yet they don't see a problem with creators using copywritten music in their content. Support all artists, not just the ones that are convenient. This is a bunch of crap. I'm going to be honest with you. I am actually someone who uses exclusively non-copywritten music in all of my content. I use music that is specifically built for being able to be used on streaming platforms and on YouTube with specific rights agreements so that I am not infringing on anything. But this is not the same dynamic that is happening here. The dynamic that you are describing, i.e. a streamer listening to a copyrighted song, is not the same dynamic as an artist being forced to sign a bad contract and then that licensing agreement being sent out to another party. What this would be analogous to, someone saying Marvel Snap should pay Jen Bartel more, is like saying Spotify, who licenses the music from like Universal or whatever record label, should pay Taylor Swift more or any artist more. And everyone thinks that. Everyone thinks that Spotify should pay artists more. That's like a really common opinion. Like, the idea that somehow there's a direct analogy from streamers playing music on their stream, which again, I want to be clear, I don't do this. Like, this is not a thing I do. I just think that this sort of like I don't really know a better way to describe this kind of argument than like deliberately taking, like, it almost seems like it's like aimed at like wrecking solidarity. Like, it's a very weird feeling to me when I see something like this, where it's like, I believe that you believe this, but I also believe it's not productive. And I it's again, like, it's not like a personal thing. It's just weird, right? Like, I don't think that there's a direct analogy between a streamer streaming copyrighted music, which is like sort of flatly, I don't do it. I don't really care, but I get it. And a company signing a license. Like, the analogy doesn't track to me because it tracks so much more to Spotify. In this analogy, Marvel Snap is Spotify, and people are saying we should pay artists more on Spotify. That's what people are saying, right? Like, that's the analogy here, where Marvel Snap is Spotify, but so and so, or Marvel Snap is Netflix, but like the writers signed their licenses over to whatever, and now they don't get residuals on Netflix. Again, that's also a thing I believe that this should fix, right? Like, the analogy doesn't track to me between a streamer playing copyrighted music and someone wanting an artist to get paid for their work being licensed. That doesn't make sense to me. The analogy is much more apropos to something like, the Netflix writers thing, where one of the big reasons the writer's strike happened was because when you get your stuff on streaming, you don't get residuals for it because the last time they negotiated their contracts, streaming didn't exist. And so you end up in a situation where you have this like contract that you signed that doesn't account for the way in which the majority of people who purchase your art or your work are purchasing it, and you get nothing out of it. And so I think that is unfair. Yeah, I do. And I don't really think there's a good analogy to be made where it's like, let's blame individual streamers for not respecting copyright in a way that doesn't sort of make the message of this get diluted in service of, I don't know, dunking on somebody? Like, I don't really know. I don't really get it. I don't really get what this take is about. It's a bad analogy in service mostly of being like, you hypocrite. Except I'm not a hypocrite about this. All the music I play on stream is specifically for like the use of being on stream. And then all the music in my YouTube videos is stream beats by Harris Heller, specifically to be made so that I don't get DMCA'd. That's the whole point of it, is so that I don't infringe on copyrights. I'm not a hypocrite about this, but even if I were, I don't think this analogy tracks. I think the analogy would be towards someone who is, listening to Spotify saying, damn, I wish people got paid got paid more on Spotify. It's like, it almost reminds me of that meme where it's like, we should make the world better somewhat. And then the other person is like, you posted that from your iPhone Venezuela bottom I don't know. I'm doing the meme wrong, but this doesn't track. Something about this argument doesn't feel right to me. It feels like it's making a poor analogy in an attempt to dunk on people. And even if I'm not one of the people being dunked on, it's in my comments, so I kind of read it as like, oh, haha, idiot streamer. But I don't do this. But it does sort of seem like the analogy doesn't make a lot of sense to me when you think about it, when you actually think it through. We're complaining about someone selling the license to someone else's work without, that person receiving any payment to it. That's much more analogous to an artist under Universal having their work on Spotify and not receiving royalties for that, or not receiving as much as you would want them to be, or a writer on a Netflix show from like, 2010, like Burn Notice or whatever, not receiving any royalties on the fact that that show gets streamed a lot because they didn't have it in their contract at the time in 2009 or 2010, before that stuff was a big deal or even mattered. All right, y'all, thank you so much. I will see you in the next one. I have been KM Best. You have been phenomenal. Thank you, thank you, thank you.